American history. He's now part of the civilian American criminal justice system. He will be treated just like any other criminal defendant being charged in the Southern District of New York. He will be booked. He will be fingerprinted. He will be at an arraignment very soon, most likely, I would say Monday. He will be in a federal courtroom. He will be apprised of the charges against him, these 4 counts against him, narco conspiracy being the most serious here. And he will be read those charges, and he will be given the opportunity to make a plea. Obviously, I think he will plead not guilty, and they will discuss whether or not he has appointed counsel or if he's going to have retained counsel. And they will even review bail or bond, Lindsay, which he will not get. But the point is, he will go through these motions like any other criminal defendant would.
If anybody's just joining us, we are watching a Department of Justice plane carrying Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. It landed a short time ago at Stewart International Airport, just north of New York City in the Hudson Valley area of New York. We are waiting for him to deplane. We have seen law enforcement officers, not lawmakers, law enforcement officers board this plane and climb up those stairs. And Caroline, I wanted to ask you more about these charges from your reading of the indictment. What is it we should know?
Yeah, these are really serious charges, Lindsay. There has been an indictment out there against Nicolás Maduro since 2020. Pam Bondi just unsealed this new, what's known as a superseding indictment, which essentially ties back to the original indictment, but adds charges, refines charges, and in this case has added his wife, who also obviously is on that plane right now. But the charges are a wide-ranging conspiracy of narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, and weapons charges. And so it details really decades-long conduct in which Maduro sort of oversaw. He was the ringleader of this criminal organization that led to the proliferation of tons of cocaine being made and distributed throughout this country and others for years now. And it is not unprecedented that the Southern District of New York would prosecute such crimes. They are good at it. They know how to do it. In many ways, this will be a typical drug trafficking conspiracy prosecution. However, obviously, we have this international, issues to be accounted for. And my question is what types of witnesses the prosecution will be able to get, and whether or not they will be able to find people to speak directly regarding some of this criminal conduct. So once he is arraigned, the discovery process is kicked off, and the government will be required to turn over whatever evidence it has regarding this criminal conduct and evidence it intends to use in court to Maduro and his defense attorneys. And we'll really get to see the full breadth of what this scheme is alleged to have been.
Caroline Polisi is with me. I also have Anna Schechter with me. But next, I want to go back to CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand in West Palm Beach, traveling with the president. Natalie, we also heard from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio today. Hegseth notably saying they effed around and found out. What else did we hear from the secretaries?
Well, again, they talked about since 2020, as Caroline was talking about, that Maduro has faced these charges in the United States, that it's not just the United States that considered Maduro an illegitimate leader, but other countries, the European Union and others, noting election fraud and Maduro clinging on to power during the last presidential election in Venezuela. But as we're seeing this striking image of the plane landing on, U.S. soil where Maduro will face these new charges, I want to share some of the reaction that's coming in from Venezuela, where some top government officials there, including the foreign minister, also the country's vice president, saying that Maduro, they still consider Maduro as Venezuela's leader, and that, that this was, they call what the U.S. did, the U.S. military actions, a violation, and calling for Maduro's immediate release. This is also in contrast to what President Trump mentioned during that Mar-a-Lago news conference earlier this afternoon when he indicated that the Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn into office to replace Maduro, and he suggested that she would work with the U.S. She's now pushing back and again saying that Venezuela considers its only president to be Maduro. I did get a chance to ask the president if he's concerned whether, bad elements of the Maduro regime will remain in place as he tries to, temporarily take over during what the administration anticipates will be this transition. And he said, quote, "We know who they are, we're on them, and they're acting much differently now than they would have acted 2 days ago." The president also saying that, the U.S. is potentially prepared to do a second strike if situation warranted that.
We are seeing some movement there inside the plane. We just saw some more law enforcement officers climb up those steps. We see more just hanging around that doorway as we wait for Nicolás Maduro and his wife to deplane before getting on a helicopter bound for Lower Manhattan. Anna Schechter, what can you tell us about the district in which Maduro and his wife are charged, the Southern District of New York?
Well, this is an extremely experienced office at handling the highest profile cases, be they national or international. And so, as Caroline was explaining, the initial charges were filed back in 2020, and this was a sweeping indictment alleging more than 25 years of a massive cocaine running scheme that allowed Maduro to enrich himself and his associates, the people around him, and firm up his grip on power. The superseding indictment that we read this morning gave more details about him, his wife, his son, more details also about Tren de Aragua, which is the name of a Venezuelan gang. It was born out of Venezuelan prisons about 20 years ago, and President Trump referenced it today, and he has been making the case to the American people for the last year, even before the election, during his campaign, that he would root out TDA and that TDA was behind a lot of the violence we're seeing in communities. It's been a real cultural touch point, a lot of argument surrounding this. Remember, the Venezuelans, allegedly members of TDA, were shipped off on planes to Sucot prison in El Salvador. And now here we are. The communist dictator of Venezuela has been brought to the U.S. to face charges. We knew something was coming, but I think we all, in the middle of the night, were stunned that he was actually being brought here to the U.S. That was something that just watching the story progress, I was stunned by that, just because it is such a big move and it's so unusual. And so let's see how this plays out. We know the charges. We see this, the charges laid out, but guess what? The prosecutors have to present their case before a jury, just like any other case. And so they need to prove that Maduro, in fact, was directing cartels, was the leader. And that could present some challenges to the prosecutorial team. The other thing is I expect legal challenges to this case probably will be surmounted, but this is going to be a huge issue that's going to take up a lot of these prosecutors' time and energy in the days and months to come. This is a big case, probably millions potentially of pages of discovery, because this goes back so long. I mean, maybe we're going to see imagery of bags of cash, machine guns, drugs, all that will come to light in discovery as prosecutors make their case that Maduro, in fact, was behind all of this, as frankly, the Trump administration has been making the case that, for example, TDA was just an extension of the Maduro regime. My read of this is TDA is sort of a loosely organized criminal organization, but the truth is that we have seen violence in communities in Colorado and other states around the country. We have seen extortion. We have seen prostitution and human trafficking. But it was actually hard to pin down because these the migrants who came in from Venezuela who were linked to gangs, there was no ID. They were moving from state to state. It's really challenging to actually pin down who they were, exactly what they were doing. And so we were relying on the migrant communities that they often victimized to give testimony about what was actually happening. So that's a little bit of context of what's been going on in the last couple of years when it comes to gang activity, drug trafficking, human trafficking in the US. And what these prosecutors are going to want to do is pin a lot of that on Maduro and say and convince a jury that a lot of that was at his direction. Now, what they have in their favor is that Maduro, he very vocally was in direct opposition to the United States and was taking support from the US's adversaries. And so all of that is going to become a part of this case as we have this sort of momentous argument that's going to play out for all of us. And the court reporters in the courtroom are going to be writing this first draft of history as this extraordinary case makes its way through the court.
For anyone just joining us, we are awaiting President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. We're waiting for them to deplane. This plane carrying both of them belongs to the Department of Justice. They are at Stewart International Airport, north of New York City. From here, they will be helicoptered to Lower Manhattan. Their arraignment could be as early as Monday on these narco-terrorism charges, as outlined in a sprawling indictment and superseding indictment that was released by Attorney General Pam Bondi today. Night has fallen on the East Coast, as you can see, and so it is getting a little bit trickier to see exactly what is happening on the activity on this plane. But we know that law enforcement officials have boarded the plane. We can see a strong law enforcement presence as well on the tarmac here, and we are waiting for them to get off of that plane as they now will face these charges. After this operation, Absolute Resolve, in the early morning hours local time in Caracas, in which members of a special elite force went in and got Maduro and his wife out. They were trying to get into a safe room in the compound, and they were not able to, but they did end up giving up, per the words of General Dan Kane. I want to ask CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi to expand on what Anna Schechter was saying in terms of the burden of proof that prosecutors will need to meet as it relates to this indictment, proving that there was this large terrorist operation from which Maduro benefited.
Yeah, Anna's absolutely right. This is a sprawling indictment, and the top charges here are conspiracy. And conspiracy is a bread and butter charge among federal prosecutions. It's an agreement. So there's an agreement between sort of this cadre of individuals that knew about these crimes, that were perpetrating these crimes for their own benefit and gain, and that executed, multiple crimes within the overarching scheme to keep the narco-terrorism going, to keep the cocaine importation going, and to keep the weaponry and illegal guns going. And so what will need to be proven, just like any other, as I noted, any other criminal defendant stands against prosecutors in this country, the prosecution will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he participated in that. In fact, the allegation is that he was sort of the ringleader of these conspiracies. Now, what may come into play here, and obviously we're seeing lawmakers declare that this was unlawful, that this is an act of war, that the president can't unilaterally go in and do something like this. But from the administration's perspective, and we heard from Marco Rubio today at the press conference, this was done against two indicted individuals. This was sort of carried out under the DOJ with the help from these other agencies, FBI, DEA, things of that nature. And just as Congress wouldn't need to approve or be informed of the arrest of a sort of an American citizen for drug trafficking, nor would they be apprised of it now. And so I don't see it as the court's duty. Courts traditionally have not weighed in on whether or not, on sort of the unilateral use of force by an executive outside of this country in foreign nations. So I don't think that is sort of an existential threat to this prosecution. In other words, I don't think a judge is going to make that call about whether or not congressional approval was needed to do this. But I do think that perhaps the prosecution will face some hurdles in terms of whether or not a judge is willing to sort of take them at face value in terms of sort of everything that they present. And then this issue of the discovery, this was illegal pursuant to international law. And so obviously you don't have sort of the blessing of the extradition in Venezuela. So you won't have the help of Venezuelan authorities, for example, of criminal sort of agencies within Venezuela to get that sort of, help that sort of, accompanying of the prosecution that you might see if this were a lawful extradition with a country that had an extradition treaty and that was sort of on board with this prosecution. So that will be interesting to see how it is all playing out.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I want to go to you. What did the president say about the charges?
Yeah, well, the president at his news conference at Mar-a-Lago, again, calling Maduro an illegitimate dictator, which is something he's called him time and time again, about these charges, alleged that Maduro was the kingpin of a vast criminal network responsible for trafficking colossal, he said, amounts of deadly and illicit drugs into the United States. The president also saying Maduro and his wife will soon face the full might of American justice and stand trial on American soil. As you've been discussing, the initial steps, the arraignment could happen in just incoming days as early as Monday. And again, worth pointing out that during this press conference, but the president and Secretary of State highlighted and emphasized that, according to them, they gave Maduro an out. President Trump said he told Maduro to surrender, and once he did not, that's when it kind of set in motion this military operation that the U.S. has been preparing for and rehearsing for months now. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that the message, if any countries or world leaders should take from this, don't play games with this administration. But again, the real question is what happens next on the ground in Venezuela? What will this transitional period look like, where the U.S. is supposed to be temporarily helping to run the country ahead of the election or appointment of a new leader? And a lot of lawmakers, even while they acknowledge that Maduro was an illegitimate dictator, they say, U.S. intervention to this extent hasn't historically ended well. And they really want to know more from the Trump administration about the exact next steps, the end game, and the strategy here.
Natalie Brand in West Palm Beach, thank you so much. Anna, let's go back to you. Anna, you had been mentioning to us earlier that this was a shocking development in the dead of night, even though we had seen that significant buildup. The USS Gerald Ford in the region, the aircraft carrier strike group. We also saw dozens of boat strikes on these alleged drug boats in which numerous people were killed. What can you tell us about the buildup and the actions that have led us to this moment?
Well, it's been days and months leading up to this. And let's go back to 9 months ago. The Trump administration started making the case that drug traffickers, gang activity was a proxy of the Maduro government. We actually heard Walls, who was national security advisor to Trump at the time, say that to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation. And then over time, you started to see an increased activity, military presence in the Caribbean, just a presence. And then after that, you started to see strikes on these boats. And so that was likely a signal to the government that things were getting very real, but it wasn't necessarily a signal that they were going to send a special forces team in the dead of night to break their way in, almost reminiscent of the bin Laden raid, extract him and fly him and his wife to the United States to face charges. But that is exactly what has happened. And it took weeks for that military presence to build into this operation, but they kept it under wraps. And at the press conference today, Rubio and Trump both said that it was the kind of thing that they didn't want leaked. They needed the element of surprise for this to be effective. And actually, if you look at decades past when American administrations have tried to effect regime change in Latin America and botched it. So this was, as the administration is saying, a successful mission in that they did get their man and no U.S. forces were killed, although we did learn that some of them did have gunshot wounds, non-life threatening, however. But that just gives you a sense of how dramatic the scene was. I also want to just note how interesting and intricate the geopolitical space is here. You had Cuban intelligence services guarding Maduro in the palace. That security apparatus essentially failed, and the United States was able to carry out this mission. It's just fascinating how this has all played out, and it has been building for months and years. But none of us could have predicted this overnight capture of Maduro. I also wanted to note for you, we're seeing, I think, Maduro and his wife going to touch down there. It's really interesting the way the indictment lays out how his wife was involved. The indictment alleges that Celia Flores attended a meeting in 2007 in which she accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes to broker a meeting between a large-scale drug trafficker and the director of Venezuela's National Anti-Drug Office, and that the trafficker arranged a bribe for $100,000 per flight to ship cocaine. So this is really interesting that's come to light. This is some new detail about specific meetings that happened over the course of the last 2 decades that prosecutors are going to present to a jury. So it almost seems when you see the prosecutor's story that they're telling, it was this elaborate scheme with multiple officials, different countries, including Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, all of those had transshipment points of the cocaine. And it just a sweeping operation that was like a huge international corporation almost is how they lay it out in the charges. And we'll see if prosecutors can successfully make the case in court.
Caroline, what else can you tell us about the charges against his wife and son?
I think, again, going off of what Anna is saying, I mean, these are sweeping allegations. Just right off the bat, the Southern District of New York prosecutors are alleging that for over 25 years, this group of Venezuelan leaders have just abused their positions of power. They're abused this public trust that they have and corrupted what they're calling a once legitimate institution to import tons of cocaine into the United States. They're saying essentially since its founding, this operation, and they're really alleging a criminal operation here. It's become one of the largest producers of cocaine in the world, and it's generated significant revenue, significant money through that trafficking, and they used that money to then fund these operations like large-scale weapons purchases and terrorist attacks. And so there are allegations at a granular level, which Anna just mentioned, about Maduro's wife arranging these types of meetings to evade the law enforcement in Venezuela and sort of around the world, but then also really high-level sweeping claims. This is an indictment that we often call a speaking indictment. It is not bare bones. it lays out line by line a lot of the evidence that I suspect the government already has. And it's really meant for public consumption. It is already a very persuasive document. And just, I can tell you from, being on the other side, the government doesn't generally make these types of allegations. I mean, an indictment is an allegation, but the Southern District of New York prosecutors aren't going to put in writing evidence that they don't have. And so you can pretty much bet that most of the specifics mentioned in this indictment, they will have sort of receipts to back up.
And I want to ask you about the cartel that's mentioned in the indictment, the Cartel of the Suns, or Cartel de los Soles. What do you know about that?
Sure. Well, the de los Solos, that is a reference to the sun insignia, which is affixed to the uniform of high-ranking Venezuelan military officials. And it's similar to a general's star, for example, in the U.S. And so what prosecutors are saying is the fact that you had these very official even symbols, the insignia, there's a reference to them. You had high-ranking military officials, government officials, all part of this massive scheme. And the Cartel de los Soles, according to experts, is sort of a loose umbrella organization that includes other drug cartels that are also known. And FARC is one of the cartels that plays throughout this indictment in terms of obtaining military-grade weapons, trafficking those, providing sort of secure passage for the drugs. But Cartel de los Soles, or the Cartel of the Suns, is a reference to that official military insignia. And I think that is symbolic of the central argument of this indictment, is that this was official business. The official business was to traffic thousands of tons of cocaine to the US and to Europe, enrich themselves, and tighten their grip. I want to note that Maduro is alleged to have used private planes under diplomatic cover to ensure that flights receive no scrutiny from law enforcement. And so the traffickers would load the plane with drug money and return to Venezuela, according to the indictment. So that's that extremely high level. He was in charge of the country, that the scheme involved high-ranking officials, but all the way up to him, that he was the top dog, and he sanctioned the use of planes under diplomatic cover to travel the ill-gotten gains, the money that they got from selling the drugs, back to Venezuela to enrich himself, his family, the people that were loyal to him. And it's just fascinating that they are making these sweeping claims. There are a few really specific stories about meetings, specific meetings. It's unclear if sources told the government, the U.S. government, about this, or if anyone was wearing wires, if they had a double agent inside the Maduro government or inside one of the cartels. One day we'll learn more about that, and that will be a fascinating story to tell. How did the United States obtain the information about the inner workings of this massive drug trafficking scheme such that they could lay it out in a federal indictment?
Well, and that's also what's so interesting, because the president today at the press conference had said, don't let anybody get that $50 million reward. And so it leads you to wonder how they got that information and exactly how they're planning on withholding that reward, if that is in fact the case. Reward leading to Maduro's arrest, of course. We are able to report that an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting on Venezuela is in the works. This is according to diplomatic sources via our Margaret Brennan. There's an effort underway to hold the meeting tomorrow, but it could be Monday morning. And Anna, another unique aspect of this story, and something that is alarming some, is the oil of it all. Essentially, the fact that the president now wants, in addition to taking over the country, to take over the infrastructure and oil assets. And how do you see that playing out?
Well, this is a great question because the subtext behind the press conference today was oil. And the fact is that Venezuela has the largest crude oil reserve in the world, but under the Maduro regime, it had significantly decreased the amount of oil it was extracting and selling around the world, and of course using for the country. So that has been in the background, and President Trump was surprisingly open about wanting to benefit from that tremendous reserve of oil. He said that in this sensitive interim time, there is a team of people, including Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and others that are essentially in communication with the vice president of Venezuela, who has stepped into a leadership role by default, and that they are going to try to take control in this interim time while they try to set up and help support a new government. I also want to note that it's not that Venezuela has no history of democracy. They do have a healthy history of democracy. They overthrew a dictator decades ago and did have a democracy for decades. So there is infrastructure there, but they just have to tap into it. And there's oil there to be had. There are Chevron workers who are right now inside Venezuela. So let's see. It remains to be seen how the Trump administration is going to capitalize on that. But at the press conference today, officials gave every indication that they do plan to capitalize on that.
All right. It looks like somebody is deplaning. And my control room tells me it looks like one of those people is wearing shackles. I'm having a very difficult time discerning exactly what is in this dark video. But we can see here many people who are deplaning here, climbing the steps in a very slow fashion. We can see somebody being helped down the steps. It looks like that person's arms are in front of them. All right, so this person is in fact in shackles, and so we believe that again, very difficult to discern, everybody. I'm seeing what you're seeing here at home, which is a lot of movement off of these stairs. We know that this is the plane that is holding Nicolás Maduro. I can't say with 100% certainty that the person that we're seeing is in fact Maduro because I can't see it with enough clarity. But we know that Maduro and his wife are on this plane and are going to be now headed to a different facility. We see lots of law enforcement officers that are carrying bags off of this Department of Justice plane after the plane sat on the tarmac for the better part of the last hour. We see a very strong presence here. A lot of people surrounding the subject. The person is now being walked on the tarmac, potentially to a waiting vehicle or helicopter, but I have to see exactly where this person is going. Person to our view looks like they are wearing blue clothing. Everybody else, law enforcement, wearing very dark clothing, dark jackets. Now our view is obscured. We can no longer see the subject. Looks like they could be going into a hangar. All right, it does not look like we are going to get a better vantage point here, unfortunately. But I can tell you that the plane that was carrying Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro did in fact land here at Stewart International Airport north of New York City, the plane carrying Maduro and his wife. And we did see somebody deplaning with shackles and a large law enforcement presence. We know that the process now will be, well, let's go ahead and talk to Anna Schechter about the process. What is the process now, Anna?
So at this point, Maduro and his wife will be escorted, likely with DEA agents on board an aircraft to New York, to Lower Manhattan, where he and his wife will need to be booked. They will likely be fingerprinted at the DEA New York field office in Manhattan. So because this is a drug trafficking case, they're taking the usual steps. And this is how they would do it. They would go, and it's DEA that is the lead essentially in terms of the investigative agency that supported the prosecutors in building their indictment, and they are a big part of this. So they're going to the DEA New York field office. Then they will be housed, according to our sources, subject to change, but they'll be housed at the Metropolitan Detention Center. That's in Brooklyn. They'll probably reach there by midnight, I imagine, tonight, sleep overnight there and be held there until what we expect to be an arraignment as soon as Monday. That's what our sources are telling us. At that arraignment, they will likely be read the charges, which are conspiracy related charges, drug trafficking, and weapons charges. They will be read those charges, asked if they understand them. We may or may not get a plea. Likely we'll get a plea at a later time. I do expect that they will likely plead not guilty and get a lawyer like any other defendant. And this could likely go to trial, or they could arrange for a plea deal. I've talked to some lawyers and legal analysts who think that possibly there's a plea deal that could be in the works early on in a case like this. But we'll see. It remains to be seen. And it's a fascinating case because the charges are so sweeping. There are some details. It's a 25-page indictment, but I've seen longer indictments. If you look at other indictments out of the Southern District of New York, you can get a 75-page indictment or even longer with even more detail. So this is not that. But you do have a few meetings detailed where cash was, as in the form of bribes, exchanged hands, narcotics exchanged hands. Maduro's private plane allegedly was used for diplomatic cover to transport drugs and transport the money earned from drug sales in the United States. All of that is laid out here, and we'll see if a jury agrees with prosecutors that Maduro was a conspirator. They were careful, I think, to put the first charge as a conspiracy, which you heard Caroline Polisi explain is a boilerplate language, but they were going for charges that they think they can win on. They want to get a conviction if it goes to trial, or they might be okay with arranging some kind of a plea deal.
Caroline, you are probably very well versed in high-profile transfers such as this. Walk us through what you're seeing to your eye, which is likely much more highly trained than my own.
Well, Lindsay, I can't say that I'm acquainted with this level of security surrounding a transfer. I mean, typically in sort of white collar cases, sometimes defendants are given the opportunity to self-surrender. Certainly, this is sort of the exact opposite of that. And in fact, at the press conference, we did hear that Maduro was given the opportunity to surrender himself. This was apparently the sort of the last option. But I wanted to pick up on a little bit of what Anna was saying regarding the potential in this case for a plea deal. What is noticeable is that 2020 indictment, the original indictment in this case, did not include Maduro's wife. And so I think that with this sort of superseding indictment that adds his wife and son to the mix, that is a classic tactic that federal prosecutors often use in sprawling cases like this to extract a plea deal. And so it could very well be that prosecutors believe that Maduro would be willing to take a plea, to admit to some wrongdoing and accept the terms of the punishment in order to get either a lighter sentence for his wife and son, to potentially have them not be prosecuted at all. I don't think that would be the case, but certainly there is some room in this indictment I see when you indict multiple family members. It is a sort of tried and true tactic among federal prosecutors that I've seen time and time again, because family members don't want to hurt other family members, and it is sort of difficult to get them to quote unquote turn on each other. And so a plea deal is often sort of an eloquent way to go about resolving those issues.
Anna Schechter, what other high-profile people have called that facility in Brooklyn at least temporarily home?
Question, and people have been noting this on social media. I'm seeing a lot of conversation around this. So Luigi Mangione has been housed there, the alleged killer of the United Healthcare CEO, and the manhunt to find him was the story of the country and the world for a few days there. It took 5 days for police to find him. That's one. Sean Diddy Combs, which was one of the trials that garnered the most attention in the last couple of years. He has been housed there as well. Epstein as well, Jeffrey Epstein. So this is a detention center that is no stranger to very high profile people. It is novel, however, to have a foreign dictator extracted from that country and brought here to face charges, housed there for sure. As Caroline laid out, this detention center has faced accusations of abuse and poor quality. And so people have been noting that. I've noticed that as part of the conversation today, but we'll see. Maduro and his wife might get special arrangements given the nature of just who they are. The fact that there are alleged members of TDA or convicted members of TDA housed there as well might change the game. Are they going to want to keep Maduro separate from that population? Probably so. And we see that often with these very high profile people detained. And we've had a number of these cases. Lindsay, you and I have sat together talking about massive cases of very high profile people being housed there, being charged and having the justice system play out for them over the last few years. It's been quite eventful, even just in the last 18 months when it comes to massive cases that garner a lot of attention. But what we just witnessed there with Maduro and his wife, it was grainy, it was dark outside, but you could still see a man in blue in the sweatsuit descending that staircase, flanked by dozens of law enforcement, including officials with DEA, the drug enforcement officials there, accompanying him, escorting him to the New York field office, which is a very sophisticated building. They actually have a drug laboratory. I have been lucky enough to see that and see how they do the testing when they bring drugs off the street and they bring it to that laboratory. They test it. Obviously, fentanyl is their number one concern, but cocaine can be laced with fentanyl, and that can happen when these drugs are ground down into white powder and they're mixed together. It's instantly deadly. And we've seen other high-profile cases of young people in particular, and some children of famous people who thought they were taking cocaine. It was laced with fentanyl and they died. And these are very young people. And we've seen that. And so the DEA in New York has gone after drug rings in Washington Park, there in Lower Manhattan. Even just in the last 6 months, we've seen some major cases, major charges filed against individuals who were part of kind of the street level ring of distributing the drugs. So you've seen those cases, and then here we are. What the U.S. government is alleging is that Maduro was at the top of the food chain, at least for cocaine, because Venezuela has provided some of the biggest volumes of cocaine to the U.S. in recent years, and that's why the government says, and the Pentagon was explaining why they were going after and targeting those boats off the coast of Venezuela, even though there was a lot of discussion about whether that tactic was lawful and was effective. Here we have another big move, bringing Maduro to the United States to face criminal federal charges from prosecutors in the Southern District of New York.
As we're watching these live images above Stewart International Airport in New York, I want to bring in Andy Boyd, a CBS News contributor who formerly worked as a senior intelligence service officer in the Central Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Operations. A huge question, of course, setting aside the criminal charges against Maduro, his wife and son, Andy, is what happens next in Venezuela.
And that's an open question, I think, for all of us, Lindsay. Since the last time we spoke this afternoon, President Rodriguez, formerly Vice President Rodriguez under the Maduro regime, held a press conference where she refuted the idea that she was accepting what is happening in her country, and she also had what appeared to be her entire cabinet. I might say they all looked very uncomfortable. But earlier during the press conference, President Trump said that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has spoken with her. So I think it's an open question as to what's going on in Caracas right now, on what sort of change they're going to accept, and frankly, what sort of pressure from the Trump administration they're going to yield to. One thing for certain, it's going to be an important intelligence collection objective for my former colleagues at CIA to understand that dynamic to appropriately inform the next policy steps that the Trump administration takes.
Andy, hang on 1 second if you can. Caroline, I want to go over to you and ask you just to elaborate on something you had said earlier in our conversation, and that is that eventually there will be some kind of a bail hearing, but that Maduro will not make bail. Can you elaborate on your certainty in that?
Yeah, I usually don't make predictions, but I'm 100% certain in this instance, Lindsay. This is a highly dangerous defendant here with the ability, really unlimited ability to potentially flee the jurisdiction. Look how much it took to get him here. So under the Bail Reform Act, the statutory requirements that a judge needs to consider for bail are flight risk and imminent risk to the community. And I think, obviously, those would sort of speak in favor of denying bail in this instance. But the point was really that procedurally, things, are going very fast now, Lindsay. He's now touched down. He will have to be booked. He will be taken to the MDC to await his official arraignment. And then, eventually he will put in a plea. When, I suspect that plea is not guilty, that's when things may, at least to our eyes, start slowing down. That is when the wheels of justice start turning more slowly, because behind the scenes, what will happen is the plea will trigger what's known as Brady obligations on the part of the Southern District of New York, which means that they need to turn over any and all incriminating information they have regarding this case to the defendants. So that means that any information that, we certainly haven't seen up until this point, this could be going back decades, they will need to provide to the defense in order for them to adequately prepare their defense and sort of make tactical decisions about what they are going to do, whether or not they want to go to trial or not. An indictment is not evidence. An indictment is simply allegations. This got past a grand jury, but the standard to indict is much lower, we all know, than obtaining a criminal conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And so it may be the case that prosecutors will meet with defense attorneys, as often happens, in order to persuade them as to really the strength of this evidence, and in order to potentially make a plea deal that would, satisfy Southern District prosecutors such that they are getting the punishment that they believe that these defendants deserve, while at the same time saving resources by not going to trial. A trial of this magnitude would cost significant resources just merely in security efforts to house him and get him to court every day. Criminal defendants are required to be at their trials. So to get him to court every day and maintain his safety, both at the Bureau of Prisons and in court, is a tremendous undertaking by the federal government. They are certainly cut out to do it, but it may be that a plea deal is what Southern District prosecutors are hoping for. Obviously, they are always prepared to go to trial, but a plea deal is always sort of lurking in the background. And, I'm very interested to see what type of counsel Maduro gets, whether or not he's able to sort of access the funds that we all know that he has to obtain private counsel, or whether or not, just think about that, Lindsay, he may have a taxpayer-funded, appointed defense counsel in this case, which I think really speaks to the integrity of our criminal justice system, that, we believe in the rights of defendants in this country. And even though we, did a very difficult job of extracting him from Venezuela, we're now affording him all of the rights and due processes that citizens of this country deserve in the criminal justice system. So it will play out just like any other.
So, Andy, as the legal process does play out, what questions do you have about the president's comments that we will manage Venezuela going forward?
My questions remain. When the president says we're going to be in charge in Venezuela, what does that mean? Vice President, now President Rodriguez, she clearly indicated that that was not the case. Now, maybe she's stating that publicly because she needs to from a domestic political perspective. Maybe she really is in communication with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But I think those are some questions that will have to be answered over the next week. And then the question is, what sort of resources do we apply to it? Military, intelligence, diplomatic, security for our oil industry. The president alluded to U.S. oil companies going back into Venezuela. I think there's a lot of open questions.
Andy Boyd, thank you so much. Anna, as we are watching these live pictures, I am just curious what is going on in your mind.
Well, I still can't get over just how historic this moment and this day is. This is highly unusual. And as Caroline was just explaining, the criminal justice system will take its course, but this is not comfortable. Maduro and his wife will be housed at the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is has notoriously poor conditions. And it's just extraordinary that he's going to face these charges, especially, Lindsay, after 5 years of knowing that an indictment was out there and continuing on as the leader of the regime, continuing to taunt the United States, taunt President Trump, there has been a real tension in between these two leaders. You have Donald Trump, the leader of the most powerful country in the world, arguably, and then you have this communist dictator who has taken over essentially complete power. He had taken over Venezuela, which had a history of several decades of democracy, but he chose to defy elections and firm up his grip on power, and as the U.S. is alleging, enrich himself and his family via narco trafficking. And so these two men were trading jabs from the Latin American continent to the United States and North America and back and forth. And I just want to remind everybody that the Trump administration has been building this case for years. Back in 2020, towards the end of Trump 1, prosecutors filed the initial indictment. Fast forward through a Biden administration and then a Trump 2 term, a superseding indictment unsealed today, right after special forces in the dead of night descended on Caracas into the palace of Maduro, into his safe room. Maduro, according to President Trump today, was closing the door of the safe room, or his team was, and he was extracted by special forces, apparently unharmed, along with his wife, transported by air back to the United States, landing at Stewart Airport, which is within the jurisdiction of the Southern District of New York. Then he's now going to be flown to show up at the New York field office of the DEA to get fingerprinted and booked. And then he'll go to the Metropolitan Detention Center. But this is a long time coming. And yet you get the sense that President Trump just pulled the trigger when the weather was right. It seems that they made the decision, and think about who the Secretary of State is, Marco Rubio. This is a person whose family fled Cuba, another communist regime, to make their life in Miami and South Florida, and he has risen up to become a senator and now Secretary of State. And clearly President Trump relies heavily on him. And for him, this felt personal, actually, at that press conference. And President Trump even called on him to answer a question about what this might mean for Cuba. Does this mean that there will be, one of the reporters in the room asked, what's next for Cuba? If you're doing this in Venezuela, what does that mean for Cuba? And Rubio, with a lot of fervor, spoke to reporters and said, essentially, watch out, that this administration means business. I'll also say that we will likely see challenges to the legality of the operation, and we'll see how all of this plays out. Again, it's going to play out in the court system here. While it plays out, at least for the beginning, Maduro and his wife will be housed in Brooklyn in this notoriously tough place to be housed, the Metropolitan Detention Center. So it's really been extraordinary. The geopolitics at play over the last 24 to 48 hours that has actually been building over the last few weeks, with a heightened military presence in the region, in the Caribbean. And then if you go back even further, you had the Treasury Department sanction Tren de Aragua, sanction the regime. You had the State Department designate Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization just in November. That sort of gives gives the ammunition to the government to go and make this case. And if you look at some of the documentation, Treasury was looking at Tren de Aragua more than a year ago, actually. So even before Trump's election the second time, you had officials in the Department of Treasury, federal officials looking at TDA. There had already been some cases filed, human trafficking cases and other big multi-state investigations into TDA and what it was doing. You also had people criticizing officials saying, well, you can't really even pin down what TDA is. And all of this is culminating tonight, as we just watched, with Venezuelan dictator Maduro walking down those steps with his wife and going to face the criminal justice system here. And we're hearing from Venezuela, the vice president, she is now saying, she is speaking out against the U.S. operation, which does not accord with what Marco Rubio was saying at the press conference today. Apparently, he spoke to her. Trump was saying that it was going pretty well in terms of the conversation, which was extraordinary in and of itself.
Certainly something else to dive into, but for now, we are going to take a quick break. My thanks to Caroline Polisi and Anna Schechter. We are going to continue to follow this breaking news, but we are going to take a quick break. Much more news. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness.
Innovative.
Magical.
It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
God, you do your research. I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The 18-year-old soccer sensation igniting worldwide buzz.
How good is this kid?
The defenders are just bewitched.
Lamine Yamal.
You ever talk to the soccer ball?
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the Takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity, informality, and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who is a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you?
Oh, come on.
Join me on the Takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
You both had talked about going on Survivor together.
Right.
A Survivor contestant believes his sister was murdered.
I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you.
And is determined to be her voice.
This is her speaking to everyone saying, don't let this happen to you.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Chilling with the queen, her name is Gail King.
Hey!
CBS Morning.
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 CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus.
See you at 7.
CBS.
CBS Mornings.
I want a mug. Yeah, good mug.
A stalker sends menacing messages to a young mother before she's murdered.
They all just kind of said, I can't believe this happened. He did it. The stalker did it. There's a killer out there, and we're going to go after him.
But the investigation reveals a sinister setup.
I think his head is spinning, thinking about what else are they going to find.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
It could be the greatest turnaround in college football history.
What is the magic here?
The undefeated Big Ten champs, Indiana Hoosiers.
CBS Morning.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
The Trump administration informed congressional leaders about the strikes after the Venezuela operation began, as you just heard there from Margaret. House and Senate leaders and the chairs and ranking members of the Intelligence Committees received the notification. Senate Majority Leader John Thune welcomed the action, saying in part, quote, President Trump's decisive action to disrupt the unacceptable status quo and apprehend Maduro through the execution of a valid Department of Justice warrant is an important first step to bring him to justice for the drug crimes for which he has been indicted in the United States, end quote. While House Speaker Mike Johnson said, quote, President Trump is putting American lives first, succeeding where others have failed, and under his leadership, it. The United States will no longer allow criminal regimes to profit from wreaking havoc and destruction on our country, end quote. Republican Congressman Rick Crawford is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and joins me now. Thank you so much, Congressman, for your time. What is your reaction to these strikes? And do you feel that Congress should have been alerted sooner?
Well, I think it's a great day for Venezuela. I think this is a demonstration of a judicious, very precision strike, executing a warrant on these criminals that need to be brought to justice. And because it was executing a Department of Justice action with the assistance of military, they are not required to notify Congress in advance. However, the congressional notification is not necessarily an advance notification. So I actually was contacted after the fact. So I've had conversations with Secretary Rubio and Secretary Hegseth. And keep in mind that Secretary Rubio is also the National Security Advisor. So he has a couple of hats to wear in the context of what's taking place here. And I think we need to just put this in perspective. Also, this is very, very similar to the action that the Obama administration took back in 2012 on al-Libi in Libya to bring fugitives to justice. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're basically using a precedent that was set and exercised on under the Obama administration.
Are you satisfied, Congressman, by your conversations with Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth, or do you have further questions?
No, I was very satisfied with the conversations I had with both of those individuals, and I'm comfortable with what the role that they play and what they have planned for future of Venezuela.
I do want to put something to you. Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, did put out a statement on X saying, in part, quote, if the United States asserts the right to use military force to capture foreign leaders it accuses of criminal conduct, what prevents China from claiming the same authority over Taiwan's leadership? What stops Vladimir Putin from asserting similar justification to abduct Ukraine's president? Once this line is crossed, the rules that restrain global chaos begin to collapse. What is your response to that?
Well, I mean, I don't engage in hypotheticals. That's kind of expected here. I mean, look, you have people who everything that President Trump does, they view through the lens of, I hate Donald Trump. The fact is, Joe Biden did not recognize the legitimacy of Maduro. The problem was that Joe Biden didn't have the testicular fortitude to do anything about it. That's the difference here. We have a president in office here now that's not playing around. What we need to understand is, if we're going to have a safe America, that requires a safe neighborhood. And he is exercising on that. And this is exactly what needed to happen. It should have been taking place years ago, but it's been allowed to fester. This is one of the most pivotal locations in the hemisphere for allowing cartels to carve out an operational space for them to act with impunity and be able to ship drugs. Hey, listen, not only to the United States, but to Europe as well. Quite frankly, I'm a little bit outraged that the Europeans aren't celebrating this decision as well, because look, what President Trump has been doing for the American people has also benefited the Europeans, only they just didn't have the backbone to address that problem. President Trump does.
I didn't have hearing testicular fortitude from a congressman on my bingo card today, but here we are, 2026. Congressman Rick Crawford, thank you for your time. Our coverage of this breaking news continues after a short break. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
To be moderator of Face the Nation means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
When do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives?
Now streaming.
You and I have to find a way to work together.
Kathy Bates is back in the new season of Matlock.
We only get one shot.
I do not believe you or trust you. Then what is with the plan?
I'm putting down roots. Sounds like the storms are coming.
Matlock. Catch up now on Paramount Plus. New episodes return.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Reiser, and we're continuing to follow breaking news. A U.S. Justice Department plane carrying Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife arrived this afternoon at an airport in Orange County, New York, which is roughly 60 miles north of Manhattan. He and his wife were taken into custody overnight after the U.S. Army's Delta Force, an elite special forces unit, carried out the operation in Caracas. A CIA source inside Venezuela's government helped track Maduro's location in the lead up to his capture, CBS News has learned. Maduro was highly guarded when he was captured. The president said it was like a fortress. And the president shared a photo this morning of Maduro in U.S. custody on his social media platform. The caption read, quote, Nicolás Maduro on board the USS Iwo Jima. Both Maduro and his wife have been indicted on narco-terrorism charges. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado called today a, quote, time for freedom. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand has more from West Palm Beach, Florida.
Nicolás Maduro and his wife arrived on U.S. soil Saturday evening, where they will face federal charges in New York related to drug trafficking and narco-terrorism. President Trump shared this picture after Maduro was captured by an elite military team overnight in what the administration is calling Operation Absolute Resolve.
Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault.
The president detailed the military action from Mar-a-Lago Saturday afternoon, hours after the overnight strike on Venezuela. The operation targeted military facilities and involved more than 150 U.S. aircraft and follows months of military buildup in the Caribbean. President Trump also says the U.S. will run the country until a safer and proper transition can occur, without specifying exactly how that will work.
Well, you know, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground.
Are you concerned that bad elements of the Maduro regime will remain in place?
Well, we know who they are. We're on them. And they're acting much differently now than they would have acted 2 days ago.
The Trump administration is defending its decision not to notify Congress ahead of the strike, but Democratic lawmakers are blasting the move and questioning what comes next.
Yes, Maduro is illegitimate. A lot of leaders are illegitimate in the world, thinking you can simply reach in like we're playing some game of Risk and remove them and then wash your hands of it and everything's fine. Well, we've learned that that's just not the way it plays out most of the time.
Venezuela's vice president insists Maduro remains the leader, calling the U.S. action a violation. Natalie Brandt, CBS News, West Palm Beach.
Anna Schechter joins us now. She's the head of CBS News' Crime and Public Safety Unit. Anna, Maduro and his wife are in New York. Where will they be detained?
They're going to be detained at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. This is a notorious detention center where various high-profile people have been held. Most recently, you had Jeffrey Epstein held there. You've had Sean Diddy Combs held there, and other high-profile people. So he and his wife are first going to stop at the New York field office of the DEA. The DEA is really the heart and soul of this case that prosecutors are bringing. The key charge is conspiracy to import cocaine. And then there's also possession of and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. So those are the charges as laid out. So they will be fingerprinted at DEA, booked, and then transported to the Metropolitan Detention Center. They'll be staying there overnight, and in the days to come, we can expect an arraignment hearing in federal court in southern Manhattan as soon as Monday, Lindsay.
Can you go into a little more detail about the case against them?
Sure. This is a sweeping indictment that alleges more than 25 years of narco trafficking, with President Maduro at the top of the food chain, his wife, who's also listed as a defendant, who was involved in some of the taking of bribes and helping this business flourish. This was they don't actually put a dollar amount on it, but you can imagine over 20 years, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of tons of cocaine that was run through from Venezuela through other countries like Honduras and Mexico and Guatemala, and then flowing into the United States. And the Trump administration is saying that it hurt many Americans and killed many Americans. We know that fentanyl, which comes from China, has been the most lethal drug on the street. in recent years, but oftentimes cocaine can be cut with fentanyl because they both are ground down to white powders. And that is what is so dangerous. We've seen some high profile cases of people who thought they were taking cocaine. It was laced with fentanyl, and within hours, they were pronounced dead wherever they were from California, across the country in multiple states to New York. And so that is what prosecutors are alleging here, is that this was an organized dissemination of illicit drugs and Maduro used even his private plane, which had diplomatic cover. He used that to transport the drugs and the money that he got from the sale of those drugs back to Venezuela. And now it also names other people, Maduro's son, other associates. This was a vast web of people that benefited and enriched themselves with the ill-gotten gains of narco trafficking, Lindsay.
Anna Schechter, thank you so much. CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi joins me now. Caroline, does the fact that Maduro is a world leader impact the case at all?
Well, it certainly impacts the dramatic nature of his extraction from Venezuela and obviously just sort of the political implications. But really, no, Lindsay, the short answer, now that he's on American soil, he will go through this criminal justice system just as any other criminal defendant would. He is being booked this evening. He will stay at the MDC Brooklyn, the Metropolitan Detention Center there under the